Today is day 41 in the search for Nancy Guthrie. That's Nancy Guthrie's house right back here. I am in Tucson, Arizona, continuing to try to dig up new information, stay on top of the case.
Brian Entin has shared new information that could change everything in the case of Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. New details are raising big questions about what really happened that night and who was involved. As investigators work on timelines, camera footage, and witness statements, attention is now on two men whose names keep coming up: Tommaso Cioni and Dominic Evans. Are these updates the breakthrough the police have been waiting for, or do they make the mystery even bigger? Join us in this video as we reveal the details. Tommaso Cioni and Dominic Evans in trouble over Guthrie case. The search for Nancy Guthrie has now reached day 41. And investigators are still trying to uncover new facts about her disappearance. After a few slower days in the case, new updates have started to appear, and some of them may help move the investigation forward. Authorities and reporters continue to follow every development closely as they work to understand what happened. The case remains centered in Tucson, Arizona, where the disappearance took place. Nancy Guthrie's home is still considered the main location connected to the crime, and much of the attention remains focused on what happened around that property on the night she vanished. One of the most important updates involves new images that investigators were able to recover from surveillance cameras around the house. Federal investigators managed to obtain additional material from cameras that were placed in different areas of the property. These cameras were located in the backyard, near the swimming pool, and along the side of the home. Earlier in the investigation, authorities had already collected images from a camera at the front of the house, and those pictures helped reveal images of a possible suspect. Because other cameras were installed around the property, investigators hoped they might also provide more clues about what happened. Recent reports say that officials were able to recover some images from those additional cameras. However, the material they found was not complete video footage. Instead of full recordings, investigators were only able to retrieve small thumbnail images that were captured when motion activated the cameras. These images are smaller preview frames rather than full clips. Even though the pictures do not show full motion video, they still provide some information about activity around the home before the disappearance took place. According to sources familiar with the investigation, the recovered images show several people moving around the backyard and side yard during the days before Nancy Guthrie went missing. Investigators are now studying these images carefully as they try to identify who those individuals might be. Now, there have been names mentioned, and they allegedly are Tommaso Cioni and Dominic Evans. Another detail found in the images shows law enforcement officers near the pool area after Nancy Guthrie disappeared. This confirms that investigators began examining the property closely soon after the incident was reported. However, the most concerning discovery is that the cameras appear to have captured nothing during the exact time when the abduction is believed to have happened. Despite being placed in important areas around the property and designed to activate when motion is detected, the cameras did not record anything during that crucial period. Sources connected to the investigation described this absence of footage as unusual. Investigators have not yet reached a clear conclusion about why the cameras failed to record anything during that time. Several possible explanations are now being considered. One idea involves a temporary internet outage that may have happened around the same time as the abduction. Some neighbors in the area have mentioned that they experienced internet problems that night. If the cameras depended on an internet connection to store or upload recordings, a connection problem might explain why the footage was not saved. Another theory being discussed is the possibility that a signal-blocking device was used. Such a device could interfere with wireless signals and prevent cameras from working properly. The situation becomes even more puzzling because a neighbor who lives behind Nancy Guthrie's house also reported problems with his own security cameras during the same time period. According to that neighbor, 2 cameras on his property stopped working around the moment the abduction occurred. Investigators have not confirmed whether these issues are connected to the crime or whether they were simply unrelated technical problems. Still, The timing has raised questions. If several cameras in the same area stopped working at the same moment, it could suggest that something unusual affected them. Another development that has gained attention involves comments made by the local sheriff. During a recent interview with a national news organization, the sheriff was asked whether the suspect responsible for Nancy Guthrie's disappearance might commit another crime. The sheriff answered that it was absolutely possible. This statement has caused concern among people living in the neighborhood, many of whom are already worried about their safety. Could the key to the mystery be hiding in plain sight, in a place no one had thought to fully examine? Let's delve deeper. The vehicle that could hold hidden answers. Authorities working on the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie have continued to examine every possible clue that might help them understand what happened. As the investigation moved forward, two pieces of evidence began receiving special attention. One of them involved DNA that had reportedly been discovered inside Nancy Guthrie's home.
Remember, they've been having issues with the DNA from inside Nancy's house.
The second involved something that, at first, might have seemed ordinary, the vehicle belonging to Nancy Guthrie's son-in-law. However, investigators believed that this vehicle might quietly hold important information, even if that information was not obvious at first glance. Because of that possibility, federal investigators eventually decided to carry out a very careful examination of the vehicle. The search was conducted by specialists working with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. These investigators did not approach the car the way most people would when they are simply looking around a vehicle. Instead, they treated it as a potential source of evidence connected to a serious case. In investigations like this, vehicles can become extremely important. Cars travel from one location to another. They carry people from place to place. Sometimes they carry objects without anyone thinking much about it. Because of that, a vehicle can slowly collect tiny traces from many different environments. Those traces might include fibers from clothing, tiny pieces of dirt or soil, small plant fragments, or even microscopic biological material. These materials can remain hidden in a vehicle long after a person believes the space has been cleaned or emptied. Investigators knew this very well when they began looking at the son-in-law's car. They understood that a vehicle can sometimes act like a quiet witness to events that no one else saw. Even if nothing obvious appears inside a car, tiny fragments might still remain trapped in places that people rarely notice. For that reason, the search of the vehicle became an important step in the investigation. Before touching anything inside the vehicle, forensic specialists began by documenting its condition. This step may sound simple, but it is extremely important in investigations. Investigators carefully photographed the car from many angles. They recorded the position of the seats, the mirrors, and any personal objects that were visible inside the vehicle. Even the smallest item can become important later in an investigation, so everything must be documented exactly as it appears. Once that process was finished, the more detailed examination began. The investigators slowly worked their way through different areas of the vehicle. They looked at the seat seams, and the spaces where the fabric folds together. These seams can sometimes trap small fibers or particles that fall from clothing. They also examined the floor mats, because shoes can carry dirt or other materials from outside locations into a car. The interior panels of the vehicle were also checked carefully. Door handles and armrests were examined because people naturally touch these areas when they enter or leave a vehicle. If someone had contact with the car during an important moment in the investigation, that traces of that contact could remain behind. One of the most interesting things about forensic work is that investigators are not always searching for something large or obvious. Instead, they are often looking for materials that are so small they cannot be seen with the naked eye. These materials might include strands of hair, microscopic skin cells, or tiny fibers that have fallen from clothing. In cases involving disappearances, these small pieces of evidence can become extremely important. They may reveal whether a person had contact with a particular object or location. They may also help investigators Determine whether something was transported inside a vehicle, even if it was only there for a short time. The vehicle belonging to Nancy Guthrie's son-in-law became especially important because investigators were still trying to understand the timeline surrounding the night Nancy disappeared. If the car had been used to travel somewhere connected to that timeline, or if something linked to Nancy had been inside the vehicle, the forensic examination might reveal that information. However, investigators also knew that another possibility existed. The vehicle might reveal nothing unusual at all. And in criminal investigations, that result can also be meaningful. Sometimes the absence of evidence can help investigators rule out certain possibilities and focus their attention somewhere else. Because of that, the examination of the vehicle was not just about finding proof of involvement. It was also about narrowing the investigation and understanding which leads deserved the most attention moving forward. The careful and patient search of the son-in-law's car therefore became one of the quiet but important steps in the effort to uncover the truth about what happened to Nancy Guthrie. And once those hidden clues were collected, how would investigators know whether they pointed to the truth or led them down a dead-end path? Stay tuned for more. The laboratory search for microscopic evidence. After investigators finished collecting samples from the vehicle, the next phase of the process began. This stage took place far away from the vehicle itself, inside a forensic laboratory, where specialists could examine the collected materials under controlled conditions. For investigators, this stage is often where the smallest clues begin to reveal their true meaning. The samples gathered from the son-in-law's car were carefully sealed and labeled before being transported to the lab. Each sample had been taken from a specific location inside the vehicle. Some came from seat seams, some from floor mats, and others from surfaces where people commonly place their hands. Every sample was treated as a potential source of information. Inside the laboratory, technicians began the slow process of examining each material. At first glance, many of these samples might appear to be nothing more than dust or debris. But under magnification and specialized testing, those materials can reveal surprising details. One of the main ideas guiding this work is something known as transfer evidence. Transfer evidence refers to the tiny particles that move from one place to another when contact occurs. For example, a fiber from a jacket may fall onto a car seat. A small piece of soil may cling to a shoe and later drop onto the floor as a vehicle. Even a brief moment of contact can leave these traces behind. Because of this, investigators were especially interested in seeing whether any materials collected from the vehicle matched evidence already connected to the case. Analysts began comparing the particles found inside the car with samples gathered earlier from Nancy Guthrie's home and the surrounding area. If even one material matched, it could create an important connection. For instance, if a fiber inside the car matched clothing associated with Nancy, investigators would need to understand how that fiber ended up there. If soil particles matched the environment near her home, it might suggest the vehicle had traveled to that location. Biological evidence was also a major focus during the laboratory examination. In many cases, vehicles can contain small amounts of DNA that remain behind after contact occurs. Hair strands, skin cells, or other biological traces may stay on surfaces long after the original contact happened. Modern forensic science allows technicians to analyze extremely small amounts of DNA. Even microscopic skin cells left behind on a surface may sometimes be enough for testing. Because of this, investigators examined the samples from the vehicle carefully to determine whether any biological material could be identified. If DNA belonging to Nancy Guthrie were discovered inside the vehicle, it would raise serious questions about how that material came to be there. It might suggest that Nancy herself, or something connected to her, had been inside the car at some point during the time investigators were studying. At the same time, investigators remained aware that the laboratory results might show something very different. The analysis might reveal no connection between the vehicle and Nancy at all. That outcome was entirely possible and would also carry important meaning. If the samples from the vehicle showed no fibers, no biological traces, and no environmental materials connected to Nancy or her home, investigators would have to reconsider their assumptions. It would suggest that the car may not have been involved in the events surrounding her disappearance. In many high-profile cases, people closest to the missing person naturally become part of the investigation at an early stage. Detectives must examine every possibility in order to understand what happened. However, forensic evidence can sometimes help remove individuals from suspicion by showing that certain objects or locations were not connected to the crime. Because of that, the laboratory analysis of the vehicle's evidence carried significant weight. The results had the power to influence the direction of the entire investigation. If a connection appeared, investigators would begin asking new questions about how and when that connection occurred. But if no link appeared at all, attention might shift toward other leads and other possibilities. For detectives searching for answers in the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, the careful examination of the son-in-law's vehicle represented more than just another step in the investigation. With the night's timeline set and key individuals quietly under scrutiny, what hidden patterns and careful planning will investigators uncover? Let's find out. The night everything changed. Nancy Guthrie's disappearance has left investigators and her family struggling to understand what happened. The FBI has spent weeks quietly collecting information about the night she vanished, and the amount of evidence they now hold is massive. They have more than 10,000 hours of video footage, cell tower records, and license plate data. Yet, despite all this, the Bureau has not made any public statements about key details of the case. This silence is unusual, and experts note that it is often intentional. When investigators choose not to speak, it usually means they have evidence that could change the course of an investigation. Evidence they are still analyzing carefully. Part of the FBI's approach relies on what investigators call behavioral evidence.
That these images that you see on your screen are potentially from 2 different days.
This is not like fingerprints or DNA. It does not need to be collected in a lab. Instead, it focuses on patterns of behavior, on the things people do repeatedly over time. This could be the routes they travel, the timing of their movements, or the way they appear in public spaces. A single sighting or action might seem ordinary on its own, but when repeated over many occasions, it builds a pattern. These patterns create a history of activity that can be very telling. In Nancy Guthrie's case, the behavioral evidence collected on the night she disappeared is considered extremely important. It shows not just what happened, but also hints at how carefully the events were planned. The timeline of the night is precise. Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker disconnected from its monitoring device at 2:28 a.m. This shows a key moment when she was likely moved from her home. Then, 8 minutes later, at 2:36 a.m., a presence was recorded nearby. The timing matches a 6-minute trip between the 2 points, demonstrating that the actions were deliberate. This is not seen as a random or careless series of events. The timing, and the exact way it matches the route taken, suggests careful planning by someone who knew the area well. Every minute of that timeline has been examined, showing that nothing about the night was left to chance. Investigators are also focused on 2 individuals whose connections to the events are significant. One person was the last verified person to see Nancy Guthrie alive. The other has a long history of friendship with the first, lasting nearly 20 years. Both remain largely silent in public, and experts say this is not unusual in legal situations. When people are involved in a case, remaining quiet is often the safest choice.
The FBI detected that signal. They mobilized immediately. They deployed resources to locations they have never publicly named.
Their silence, combined with other evidence and the patterns of movement that night, has made these 2 men the center of attention in the investigation. Experts are studying how much these men may have known about Nancy's routines, her habits, and her security measures. The evidence suggests planning. This disappearance does not appear to have been impulsive. Investigators note that those responsible seem to have studied Nancy's habits, her health, and her home environment ahead of time. Every action from the first contact to her movement from the home appears coordinated. The timeline, her pacemaker disconnection, and the observed patterns all point to careful forethought. Those involved appear to have known exactly what to do, how long it would take, and how to avoid being noticed. Experts describe this as deliberate and calculated. Finally, the FBI's silence and the careful collection of evidence show how methodical this investigation has been. The combination of behavioral patterns, the timeline of events, the two key individuals, and clear signs of careful planning all point to a thoughtful, deliberate approach. Each small detail, while ordinary on its own, adds up to a picture of deliberate action by people who were familiar with Nancy's life. Investigators are using this evidence to reconstruct the night, understand the movements, and identify potential suspects. The goal is clear: to locate Nancy Guthrie, hold the responsible individuals accountable, and piece together a story that explains a night full of mystery, fear, and careful planning. Every hour, every observation, and every pattern is being used to build a case that is not based on speculation, but on repeated, verifiable fact. The FBI's work continues quietly, steadily, and with purpose, showing that even in the absence of public updates, progress is being made. When investigators began examining the precise moments before Nancy Guthrie vanished, what did the timeline reveal? Let's learn more. The silent abduction, Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, unfolds. On the early morning of February 1st, 2026, a series of events began that would prompt federal investigators to review over 10,000 hours of surveillance footage without offering the public a clear explanation. The investigation centered on the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, an 84-year-old resident of the Catalina foothills in Tucson, Arizona. Nancy had lived in the same home for more than 50 years and relied on daily cardiac medication as well as a pacemaker, which tracked her heart's activity and linked to her iPhone via Bluetooth. A pacemaker app only loses its connection under 3 circumstances. The phone moves out of Bluetooth range, the app is manually disabled, or the person wearing the pacemaker is relocated beyond the signal range of their home network. In every case, the conclusion is the same. Nancy Guthrie was physically moved at that time. She was elderly, dependent on her medication and device, and had lived in the same home for decades. The pacemaker recorded the moment her normal life was interrupted. The FBI and the Pima County Sheriff corroborated this information, but deliberately refrained from releasing details about the vehicle, its make, model, or destination. NBC correspondent Liz Kitts tested the route between Nancy's residence and the camera location. The drive, designed to avoid intersections and remain discreet, took 6 minutes. Adding this to the pacemaker timestamp, investigators established that the vehicle's appearance at 2:36 a.m. aligns precisely with the timeline of her abduction. The 2-minute margin is understood not as a discrepancy, but as the time taken for someone executing the plan to prepare and move safely. The FBI possesses extensive supporting evidence
on this very compelling situation at the Guthrie house today, as the FBI spent several hours.
This includes cell tower records, license plate readers, and digital intelligence documenting movement in the corridor between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. None of this information has been shared publicly, a silence interpreted by experts as protective of the ongoing investigation rather than a lack of evidence. Observers who reviewed the ring footage suggested the vehicle was a Kia Soul, a common, quiet passenger car, likely chosen to blend in. Geographical considerations further contextualize the investigation. Camino Royale connects directly to East River Road, which allows access south toward Tucson City, west through residential areas, north toward Oro Valley, or east into desert terrain. The direction of the vehicle remains undisclosed, a deliberate choice reflecting either the need to protect the investigation's integrity or the tracing of the vehicle to its destination. The The behavioral record, including repeated observations, patterns, and prior knowledge of Nancy's routines, presents a complex portrait that is highly relevant in court. Nancy Guthrie's personal history adds context to her disappearance. Born in Kentucky in 1942, she married Charles Errol Guthrie in 1963. They lived abroad briefly before settling permanently in Tucson. Nancy raised 3 children, built a career in public relations, and lived alone for over 50 years after her husband's sudden death in 1988. By February 2026, she maintained her routines, attending virtual church services weekly and remaining mentally alert despite her age and limited mobility. On the evening of January 31st, Nancy spent several hours with her daughter and son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni. She returned home safely, with Cioni observing her entry into the garage at 9:50 p.m. From that point, the verified record is silent until the pacemaker disconnects at 2:28 a.m. Multiple security devices were neutralized during this period. Biological material confirmed as Nancy's was recovered inside the home, but every personal item, her wallet, medications, phone, and car, remained untouched. Investigators concluded she did not leave voluntarily. If the events of that night did not stop at Nancy Guthrie's street, what clues might be waiting just beyond the original search area investigators first examined? Let's find out. Looking beyond the first search area. As investigators kept working to understand what happened to Nancy Guthrie, their focus slowly began to move beyond the area closest to her home. In the early days of the investigation, most of the attention was placed on the streets and neighborhoods immediately around where she lived. This is a common step in many cases because investigators usually start with the place where the person was last known to be. However, as more information came to light, it became clear that events connected to the case might stretch slightly farther than the first search area. Small details from nearby roads and neighborhoods began to raise new questions for investigators. One important part of the investigation involved studying the possible directions a vehicle could travel after leaving the nearby back road where it was recorded. After passing through that quiet residential road, a driver would soon reach East River Road, which is a larger road that connects to many other parts of the city. From there, several different routes become possible. If the driver turned south, the road would eventually lead toward the center of Tucson and connect to Interstate 19. This highway travels south toward Rio Rico and continues toward the Mexican border. A driver choosing this path could quickly leave the immediate area and blend into highway traffic. If the vehicle traveled north instead, it would move toward Oro Valley, a community located along the foothills outside the main city area. This direction would lead through quieter residential spaces and suburban roads. Another option would be traveling west, which would guide a driver deeper into Tucson through more neighborhoods and local streets. There was also a fourth possible direction. A vehicle could travel east into areas where homes are more spread out and the land becomes more open. These regions include desert terrain and places with fewer buildings. Such areas sometimes have trails, dry riverbeds, and large open spaces where activity is less noticeable. Each of these routes offers a different way for someone to leave the area. Some paths provide quicker access to highways, while others allow a driver to move through quieter roads where there are fewer people around. Investigators have carefully considered how someone familiar with the area might choose one route over another. At the same time, another issue began to draw attention.
There was a blacked-out SUV that went into the garage of Nancy Guthrie's home behind me.
The size of the search area that investigators first used. During the early stage of the case, authorities focused on a 2-mile radius around Nancy Guthrie's home. This means they searched neighborhoods, cameras, and possible evidence within that distance. Starting with a smaller area helps investigators work faster and concentrate resources where they believe the most important clues may be found. But as time passed, new information suggested that useful evidence might exist just beyond that 2-mile boundary. One of the most important pieces of information came from a Ring security camera that was located about 2.5 miles away from Nancy's home. Because the camera was outside the original search area, investigators had not collected the footage during their first canvass of the neighborhood. The recording was discovered by the homeowners themselves. After watching news reports about the disappearance, they decided to check the footage from their security camera. While reviewing it, they noticed that a vehicle had passed their house during the early morning hours at a time that seemed close to the developing timeline of the case. Realizing that the recording might be important, the couple decided to share the footage. They first contacted media outlets and later made sure investigators had access to it as well. Their decision to come forward helped add another piece of visual information to the timeline. Around the same time, another small detail surfaced from someone living near the same road. A neighbor later shared that she had seen a man walking in that area on the day after Nancy disappeared. According to her description, the person looked younger and did not appear to be someone simply out for a normal walk. She also mentioned noticing what seemed to be an abandoned car nearby. At the time, the sighting did not seem important enough to report immediately, so she only spoke about it with her husband. Later, once the disappearance became widely known, she realized the observation might matter and shared it publicly. Because this sighting happened near the same road connected to the vehicle route, some people began to wonder if the two events could be related. However, the true importance of the sighting has not been confirmed publicly, and investigators have not explained how they evaluated it. Later reports suggested that federal investigators had already examined the footage and believed it did not immediately provide a clear breakthrough. Sources connected to the investigation described it as a possible dead end, though they did not explain exactly why. Even so, the information could still be useful. In complicated cases like this one, even information that seems small at first can later become an important piece of the larger puzzle. What do you think about the Guthrie case? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you for watching as we examine the details and unanswered questions surrounding Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. If you found this breakdown helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the next video on your screen to continue exploring this case. See you there.